Why, hello there. Welcome all. This is going to be a very special episode. So grab your broomsticks, make sure all cauldrons are nicely secured, and let's dive right in. On tonight's episode of Kierra's Haunted House, today we'll be discussing how I got over my fear of watching scary movies and how you can too. Growing up, I was not a big fan of horror movies at all. And one of the movies that actually got me out of my fear may be one that you're not gonna quite expect me to say. In fact, you may be a tad confused because this is not really what people normally consider a horror movie. The movie is titled Young Frankenstein. Between this movie and Frankenweenie, I gotta say, these are my two, they're sitting right there neck and neck with my favorite horror genre black and white films. Young Frankenstein came out in 1974. Some may view this movie as horror. I honestly don't. I view it more like a comedy than anything. For the synopsis, it says, an American grandson of the infamous scientist, struggling to prove that his grandfather was not as insane as people believe, is invited to Transylvania where he discovers the process that reanimates a dead body. If you're generally not a person who likes horror, I feel like the best way to jump into it and try to get yourself accustomed to seeing horror and things like that would be to introduce yourself with things like this, where it's not so graphic and it's not so honed in on the horror that you're not able to enjoy it because you're naturally not a person who enjoys horror movies. One of the other things that I really had to break down for myself is, why am I scared of these scary movies when I am very aware that it's a movie? And it's also very possible that even with everything that I say in this video, you still may be scared of scary movies. I'm just pretty much sharing how I overcame my fear. And maybe overcame it is not really the word I want to use, because let me tell you something, if it comes down to watching Scream or watching Paranormal Activity, I'm definitely gonna pick Scream every single time, you know what I mean? So maybe that's not the word that I really want to use here, but I was once at a point where I wouldn't even watch a Scream movie. But if I were to recommend something in horror to someone who really is not a big horror fan, Young Frankenstein would definitely be the way to go, because I feel like it eases you into the horror genre without giving you too much. I think my biggest issue with watching horror movies at first was that I'm the type of person, I watch something and I fully engulf into whatever it is that I'm watching. I don't know how to just really watch something and not find a way to relate to it in some kind of way. And watching my favorite character be axe murdered in a movie for a long time, it was kind of it felt like I was experiencing it, and it became way too real. And maybe that's something that a lot of people are not going to relate to watching this video, but that was definitely my major issue when it came to watching horror. A lot of people are not going to forgive me for saying this, but movies like Coraline, hold on, stay with me. Movies like Coraline and movies like Hide and Seek with Robert De Niro and Dakota Fanning, between those two, I don't know which one specifically it was that traumatized me more, but no thank you. I thought it also would be great to explain to you guys that while I will be talking about horror this October, I am coming from a place of a person who was literally terrified of horror. I was so terrified of it for so long and would not watch anything that had anything to do with something scary until one day I was just you know what? TV is not doing too good right now. So we got to switch it up some kind of way. And then that's when I started watching Scream, and then I fell in love with the entire Scream franchise, and yes, I will be talking about it this October at some point. The next thing that I would do is slightly turn up that dial on horror movies. What you really want to do is start off with things that have elements of horror in them, but they're not so terrifying to the point where they're outright just a horror movie. So the next movie I would recommend for someone who is very fresh into getting into horror is a movie like Jaws. And I know what you're thinking, how do you jump from Young Frankenstein, which is a little bit of comedy sprinkled in and safe. How do you jump from that and Frankenweenie and then jump straight into Jaws? How does that make sense? Let me explain it to you. The reason why Jaws is a great bridge between watching Young Frankenstein and watching something like The Shining is because if you look at it, Jaws was made a while ago. You can clearly tell the shark scene, you can tell that it's a fake shark. It helps center you in the fact that this is not real, and you're gonna easily be able to just remind yourself this is not really happening. For those of you who do not know, Jaws is an American classic made by Steven Spielberg in 1975. The plot is very driven by a shark being the murderer in like this slasher film. This shark is pretty much killing everybody and things like that. But like I said, you're gonna be able to tell that this is not real. It's not gonna make you feel too scared. And next, if I were to up the dial even more, I would move on to something like Piranha. And I'm gonna tell you why. Depending on which Piranha you're watching, if you're watching the really, really old one, I think it's gonna fall under the same lines of you watching a movie like Jaws, where you're obviously going to be able to tell which things are real and which things are not. So if anything, it's going to feel more like a comedy than anything else. If you go ahead and watch the one that came out in 2010, you might feel a little bit different, but it's not going to be so horrendous that you're going to be like, oh my God, I can't do horror. I think that this gradual progression from a movie that is funny with horror elements in it to something like this, I think the transition is going to be nice and smooth because, like I said, you want to build this horror thing up. You don't want to just jump straight into The Shining like day one if you're a person who really is not used to watching horror and you're terrified of it. Another key element that I discovered while watching horror movies is that a lot of times the reason that people are so scared of horror movies is not even because of the horror itself or the events that take place. That is not the case for every single movie. Trust me, I've tried this method. It definitely does not work for every single movie, but it does work for a lot of them. One of the main reasons that people are so terrified of horror films is because of the music playing in the background. I think that the music in horror movies often is a great demonstration of how influential music can actually be and how well music and film go together. Because music and film really go well together like peanut butter and jelly. You don't have to take my word for it. Look at movies like Twilight. Twilight is known for its plot, yes, and other things that we're not going to talk about right now, but it is also just as well known for its music and the different songs that were picked out in that movie because they are very memorable. There's even been studies on that like music is a very huge contributor to increasing the level of fear that someone will feel when watching a horror movie. Naturally, as a member of Gen Z, I ran to the internet, searching for any articles that may back me up on my theories about how horror movies use music to influence fear in the audience. According to this article that I found, Nosferatu was the first horror movie to have a soundtrack, made in 1922. In my second article that I found, they discussed that high screeching noise that they often show in movies that lets the audience know that something isn't quite right, that danger is nearby. David Pogue from the CBS News, in an article talking about the effect that music does have on a horror movie, he asked, something that is high, dissonant, and screeching might suggest something in our unconscious that is screaming, and that of course makes us panicky. In response, I'm not sure what the proper way to say his last name is. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get it wrong, but I'm going to try my best regardless. Anthony Lasagnina, a neuroscientist, says we want to attend to things. For example, like a baby crying, a sound rustling behind you. That would be a very important thing to attend to if it was a predator, Lasagnina said. I found this article to be very interesting because it also talks about the lullaby that Mia Farrow sings to her baby in Rosemary's Baby, using this as an example of how even when something is quiet, it can still have components in it that make it creepy. To continue paraphrasing here, they also went into detail about how sometimes, especially when you watched horror as a young child, your brain becomes very familiar with certain notes that are played on a scale that will inevitably make you think danger is nearby. One of the other really notable parts about it is where they talk about how the fear of the unknown is like the foundation of most horror movies or things that scare us in general. They talked a lot about how pre-existing fears can play a really big role in the fear of the unknown. We don't watch scary movies without the pre-existing notion that this movie is intended to scare us. We already know that something bad is going to happen, and we already know that people are probably going to die. And yet, we watch anyway. My favorite type of horror is slasher films. It's the key components of mystery. So you got mystery and you got intrigue. You'll get some backstory. You even have the option of sneaking some humor in. And one of the best parts? The call is coming from inside the house. The beast is one of your own. And the clock is ticking. Slasher films often allow for you to really get to know the characters that you're watching. So when you see them getting unalived one by one by one, you do feel for these characters. And then there's the allure of the final girl, which maybe one day I'll get into that. I don't really know yet, but I just love the whole idea of the final girl. Slasher films are often based in reality because we walk amongst monsters every single day. I mean, have you seen those Karen videos? Yeah. Okay, moving on. So let's get together and talk about what I found out about the 3 protective frames and why, for a lot of people, no matter what they see within this video, may never be able to watch horror comfortably. This is an article that I found on hbr.org. Again, all of my sources are linked in my description box if you're simply curious and just want to check out some more. But let's take a look at what I found. They discuss the 3 frames that allow someone to enjoy horror movies. Number 1, the safety frame. They discuss that one of the key components in someone being able to enjoy horror is them feeling like they're watching a movie. So if you're generally a person who struggles with seeing something and being able to convince yourself that it's not really there, even in circumstances outside of watching horror movies, you may not find them enjoyable. It says here in the article that research suggests that we must possess a psychological protective frame. It says that we need to believe that we are safe at all times while watching the movie, that whatever is causing destruction in the movie is not actually going to come out of the movie and harm us as well. Which brings me to the next protective frame, detachment. This kind of goes hand in hand with the first one in the sense that you're watching this movie and you're able to tell yourself that the events taking place are not actually happening. In the third protective frame, another thing that can prevent someone from watching a horror movie is a severe lack of confidence. If you do not believe that you can escape from the danger in the movie, you'll feel super uncomfortable when watching it by yourself. If we have confidence in ourselves and genuinely believe that we could escape from whatever danger is occurring in the movie, that confidence will allow us to be able to watch it. It's the sense of feeling prepared. Also in this article, they talk about how sometimes people can watch these horror movies and use them as ways to execute what they would do in real life, which kind of goes hand in hand with what I literally just said. And this part was really interesting. It says, some research indicates that people with a higher sensation seeking trait, i.e., a stronger need for experiencing thrill and excitement, tend to seek out and enjoy horror-related experiences more. A Sagittarius. I read a lot of the comments under this post that I made about what exactly about horror scares a lot of you. And thank you guys so much for coming through with all these really good answers. But then I decided I'm going to do research on this as well, because I actually experienced this at one point, and this was a part of one of my reasons why I did not want to watch any horror movies. A lot of you guys said nightmares. So let's talk about what I learned about watching horror movies and nightmares. In an article about nightmares after horror movies, one quote says, nightmares are predominantly caused by stress, and horror films are designed specifically to heighten emotions. Dr. Catherine Hall also suggests to try and lean into those feelings, as feel-good hormones such as dopamine and serotonin are also released as a response, which can boost your mood after the nerves have settled. I always say, if you're gonna watch a horror movie, watch something funny at least for an hour. For me, that always resets my brain, and I don't have nightmares after 9 times out of 10. Horror should be fun. Horror has now become one of my other favorite genres, besides comedy. And like I said, even after watching this video, you still may not feel completely comfortable with horror. I just wanted to share my experience about how I finally overcame my fears. Another part of this article suggests watching behind the scenes footage, which I totally agree. When you see them getting ready in like hair and makeup, and you see like that time-lapse process of them doing different things, it does make it easier to recognize that everything that you're seeing is fake at the end of the day. For some people, horror is not an option because maybe it takes a toll on their mental health, maybe it reminds them way too much of reality, and all those reasons are completely valid. I just wanted to share how I got over my fears of watching horror movies. So which of these tips actually helped you? Or is there a tip that you found outside of this video that helped you understand why you're scared of horror and maybe pushed you into watching more often? Feel free to share your thoughts down below. Because I feel like there's a lot of things in horror that I really want to talk about and react to, I'm going to be extending my Halloween special episodes to the end of November. And that's going to piss some of you off. But for those of us that'll be watching, I'll see you in the next one. I know a lot of y'all, like y'all see the people reacting to Scream and you see the Scream stuff in general and you really want to watch that stuff. So I really hope that this video helped you. I don't like roller coasters, so horror movies are like my version of a roller coaster. Like I know that it's going to be scary as crap, but I'm still going to watch anyway. Anyways, really hope I helped. Can't wait to see you guys in the next one. Love ya. Bye.